As they say, we've reached the end of the line. The Kremlin has officially accused the United States of America of disrupting negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine. In Moscow, they stated that Donald Trump brazenly betrayed Russia and Vladimir Putin personally, since he promised something to Putin in Anchorage but never fulfilled it. That's why Putin is now demanding security guarantees from America for Russia, which, let me remind you, is supposedly at war with NATO. And now listen carefully, because this is very important. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, directly accused the United States of a lack of progress in ending Russia's war against Ukraine. He claims that Putin and Trump in August 2025 in Anchorage supposedly, quote, seemed to have settled the war and moved towards broad and mutually beneficial cooperation. But since then, the United States has created artificial barriers to cooperation. Lavrov directly accused the United States of rejecting Alaska's peace proposals, imposing new sanctions against Russia, seizing Russian tankers from the Shadow Fleet, and introducing secondary tariffs on the import of Russian oil. As they say, sanctions are supposedly only helpful to Russians, but for some reason, these very Russians keep complaining about them. And Lavrov also stated directly that if that's the case, if Trump behaved so brazenly, then Russia is ready to start a war against Europe and demands full control over the government. And against this backdrop, Vladimir Putin has already announced that Russia is demanding security guarantees from the United States and NATO, otherwise Russia will start a global war. And that's far from all the madness. So let's discuss what the Kremlin is planning. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave any comment, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, the honeymoon between the administrations of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin seems to be officially over. The Kremlin publicly stated that Trump not only deceived but betrayed the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and all of Russia as a whole. In this regard, Sergei Lavrov claims that Russia supposedly does not intend, of course, to attack Europe, but adds that if there is a threat to the Russian Federation, Moscow's response will not be limited to a special military operation. Next is a quote from Sergei Lavrov. If Europe suddenly starts attacking the Russian Federation, it will not be a special military operation on our part, it will be a full-scale military response with all available military means. But friends, this statement from Sergei Lavrov was just the beginning of the hysteria. Here, it's worth breaking everything down step by step. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, directly accused the United States on February 9 of the lack of progress in ending Russia's war against Ukraine. He says it's not Russia's fault, not Ukraine's fault, it's the Americans and personally Donald Trump who are to blame for the war continuing. Lavrov stated directly that it's not even Ukraine anymore, but specifically the United States that is not just interfering, but actually disrupting the onset of peace. And this is where things get really interesting. Lavrov accused the United States of rejecting peacekeeping proposals that, according to him, the United States itself had put forward at the United States-Russia summit in Alaska in August 2025. And they are disrupting all of this by introducing new sanctions against Russia, seizing Russian tankers and the Shadow Fleet, and imposing secondary tariffs on the import of Russian oil. They say all this indicates that the United States of America, well, as they put it, promised something in Alaska, but now they've simply deceived us. But the most striking thing in this story is that we've all been wondering, what is this spirit of Anchorage that Russians keep talking about? They kept insisting all along that supposedly Putin and Trump secretly reached some final agreement in Alaska, but no one knows what it was about. And now Lavrov has stated that the United States and Russia, quote, seem to have already settled Russia's war against Ukraine at the summit in Alaska and moved towards broad and mutually beneficial cooperation. But since then, the United States has created artificial barriers to cooperation. And here it's important to understand that the Kremlin has set its entire machine in motion to show that no, they are not the ones disrupting the negotiations. It's Donald Trump who deceived and betrayed them. After that, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also stated that the United States and Russia reached a number of agreements in Alaska, which, according to Peskov, could lead to a breakthrough in peace negotiations. No one is actually saying what agreements were made. And essentially, the Kremlin is using the lack of publicly available documents from the Alaska summit to claim that Russia and the United States reached a mutual understanding about ending the war in Ukraine during that very meeting. And here, it all looks as if Russians are being prepared for something worse. Well, you know that Telegram and YouTube are already really being blocked there. But Kremlin officials claim that at the Alaska summit, principles were agreed upon based on the speech of President Vladimir Putin, delivered in June 2024 before the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, in which Putin insisted on Ukraine's capitulation to Russia's initial demands. Kremlin officials are trying to push the United States to back down, to completely abandon the recent United States-led negotiations with Ukraine and Europe, in favor of some kind of United States-Russian settlement based almost entirely on Russia's demands. And now the entire diplomatic apparatus of the Kremlin is publicly trying to convince everyone around that Trump practically took that very speech by Vladimir Putin from 2024 and simply rewrote it into a peace plan which consisted of 28 points. Like Trump agreed to both Ukraine's capitulation and NATO's capitulation, and now he's just backing out of it. Well, and here the Russians have completely lost it. Lavrov confirmed Russia's demands for effective control over the post-war process, the Ukrainian government, as well as the size and composition of its armed forces. Lavrov stated that he has no doubt that Russia will prevent the deployment of any weapons threatening Russia on the territory of Ukraine in order to ensure the security of the Russian Federation. These are all quotes, and here it is important to understand that Lavrov's statements demonstrate that Russia wants to dictate not only the number of troops in Ukraine's post-war army, but also the weapons and equipment in Ukraine's arsenal. And this, again, refers to the Istanbul Protocol of 2022, and I would like to remind you that the restrictions contained in the Istanbul Protocols would have left Ukraine completely defenseless against future Russian aggression, which would definitely have happened. Lavrov's demand regarding Western weapons would likely exclude any significant Western military assistance to post-war Ukraine in the future. Rejecting the United States backed efforts to create a strong Ukrainian army to ensure Ukraine's security after a peace settlement. Lavrov claims that a peace settlement should eliminate, as he put it, quote, the Nazi roots of Ukraine to ensure Russia's security and, attention, the rights of Russian-speaking residents in Crimea, Donbas, and Novorossiya, as he said. Wait a minute, so Crimea and Donbas are occupied by unwashed Russians. Can't you ensure the rights of Russian speakers there? What kind of nonsense is this? But don't jump to conclusions, it sounds like nonsense. Moreover, Lavrov stated that Russia demands the resignation of the current Ukrainian government and its replacement with a pro-Russian puppet government. And here is Lavrov's mention of Novorossiya. Well, that is, this fictional region in the south and east of Ukraine, which includes not only the occupied regions, and it continues to demonstrate that Russia's territorial demands go far beyond the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions, but that's not all. Then Lavrov openly started threatening Europe with a big war. And here we return once again to Putin's old demands. The fact is that in December 2021, Russia issued ultimatums to NATO, demanding security guarantees from the United States and NATO that would amount to the destruction of the current NATO alliance. With the demand, as you may recall, that NATO completely withdraw troops or weapons systems from member states that joined NATO after 1997. Basically, half of NATO would need to be excluded from the alliance. At that time, Putin put forward demands equivalent to the complete capitulation of Ukraine and NATO. In fact, signaling that any peace agreement that does not take into account Russia's demands, both to Ukraine and to NATO and the West, will not satisfy Russia, and Lavrov repeats this today. As a result, the Kremlin directly stated that the United States must abandon the negotiation process that the United States is conducting with Ukraine and Europe. Since the publication of the 28-point plan proposed by the United States and return to the proposals put forward by the Kremlin. That's all the negotiations with the unwashed Russians. In other words, they say, we've been negotiating for more than a year, but let's just cross all that out, go back to some Istanbul protocols, and start over. It has come to the point where the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already stated that in order to end the war in Ukraine, Western countries are obliged to provide security guarantees to Russia. This was stated by Lavrov's deputy Alexander Groshko. Here is his quote. "We recognize that a peaceful settlement in Ukraine should take into account Ukraine's security interests, but the key point, of course, is Russia's security interests. At the moment, neither the United States nor the European Union is talking about guarantees for Russia, but without them, no peace agreement is possible." So what exactly should those security guarantees for Russia look like according to the Kremlin? So, the Russian Foreign Ministry noted that the guarantees should include excluding the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO and a refusal to deploy foreign troops on Ukrainian territory. And overall, an assurance that no threat to Moscow will come from Kyiv, and that Kyiv itself will no longer be considered a staging ground for fighting against Russia. In this case, Moscow is ready to support guarantees for Ukraine, but only those that were developed in 2022 in Istanbul. That is, the ones where Russia acts as a guarantor of Ukraine's security. This is some kind of total, complete absurdity. And the funniest thing is that the Kremlin is proposing that Europe and Russia provide each other with non-aggression guarantees. Quote from Grushko. "We are ready to formally record the relevant guarantees in a legal document on a collective mutual basis." But the whole paradox is that at the same time, Lavrov states, quote, "The current position of the European Union excludes not only constructive, but any meaningful participation in the peace process." In general, I think it's no secret to anyone anymore that throughout Donald Trump's year of presidency, Russia wasn't really negotiating, but was simply stalling for time. Now Donald Trump is stepping down, because Lavrov already told him to his face that it's Washington that doesn't want peace, and Trump, like a fool, will keep repeating that Vladimir Putin really wants peace. And he kept his word. I'll leave it at that. Share your thoughts and conclusions in the comments below. If you found this episode interesting, you can support our YouTube channel with your donation or by subscribing. All the links and details are in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles.